Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I am back with another ranking of all the works from a mystery author, as voted on by you. This time it is S.S. Van Dyne's Philo Vance and his 12 mystery novels. And I will say, my opinion of these books dropped dramatically on this reread. My opinion of Philo Vance, the character, has stayed the same. I still adore him. He's still a top 10 literary detective. My opinion of the supporting characters, John F.X. Markham, Sergeant Heath, and even the fictional Van Dyne, probably went up. The characters are definitely the best thing about these books, but as novels, I was shocked at how much I struggled through these. I don't remember having this issue in the past. My opinion of the real S.S. Van Dyne as a writer tumbled. And the problem is that these 12 books don't vary much, and you can very much feel they're confined and restrained by his rules of detective fiction. S.S. Van Dyne is the creator, or one of them at least, of the 20 rules of detective fiction, and he is a stickler for them, and it's much to his detriment. I'll get further in as I get into specific books, but before I begin, fair warning, there may be spoilers ahead, but I will warn you when one is coming, and you can skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled. And make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with this channel. Starting, as always, at the bottom, at number 12, the worst Philo Vance novel had some competition, but I ultimately decided on the Gracie Allen murder case. And yes, the actress Gracie Allen and her husband George Burns do appear in this book. The reason why I have this one last is because S.S. Van Dyne considered this one his worst, and while I think a few others are certainly in contention, I decided this is probably the one to pick. I mean, the most irritating thing about this one isn't the terrible plot, the goofiness of it, or the slogging writing, all of which are problems, but the clear fact that this book was written solely because the film producers wanted Gracie Allen to star in a film adaptation, as the film adaptations of Philo Vance were also sagging in popularity. I mean, the book is barely a mystery novel. Its main focus is on like the comedic antics of Gracie Allen, who, along with her husband, work in a perfume factory. There's a murder in a nightclub that's like tangentially related to the perfume factory. It was difficult for me to get into this one, and after a while, I just simply didn't care. I suppose if you like really, really like Burns and Allen, and really Gracie Allen, you may find this one charming, but I personally found the writing bad, the plot uninteresting, and a host of other issues that just piled on top of the other. So I have the Gracie Allen murder case in last place here at number 12. At number 11, another poor entry, and that is the Kidnap murder case. And this one is terrible. And we have the pretty standard plot here of a wealthy man who's actually heavily in debt and finds himself in trouble. At this time, he's been kidnapped and eventually found murdered. And it's just so run of the mill. It never really interested me. Van Dyne's rules really feel apparent here in this one, as it's clear he's unwilling to break them to do anything interesting. And that was fine at first, but it really just confines him to drudgery here. And the characters are stock. It's very easy to pinpoint who is responsible pretty much from the get go. The how is more complicated, but it's not particularly interesting. We also have a lot of talk about gemstones, which is something some of these Philo Vance novels tend to do. They sometimes become encyclopedias for certain topics, and in this one, it's gemstones. And this is fine if you're interested in gemstones, but I'm not. So it felt like I was reading an encyclopedia. And there's just really nothing clever about this book at all, or even like mildly interesting. I did consider putting this one last, and the reason why I didn't is because at least it has a fully functioning plot, which the Gracie Allen book, I mean, does, but sort of. It's not really the focus. My other issue with the kidnap murder case is some of its content. The Philo Vance books are normally remarkably clean in regards to terrible depictions of racial and other minorities. This book is not, and it really jars because the other 11 books do not have this problem. We have some mockery of the mentally ill and talking about whether or not their glands are responsible for their condition, which, I mean, mystery authors do tend to get into glandular diseases, and it's really awkward, and they should stay away from them because they sound dumb. But the big issue here is race. And Philo Vance, who never does this, makes a number of really racially charged statements, including at one point yelling and screaming at a black housekeeper and calling her Aunt Jemima. The narrator, Van Dyne, and I should mention the author put himself in these books as a fictional lawyer version of himself and also the narrator. He also makes a number of racial comments, and the N word is even used. It's like Van Dyne knew his books were starting to flop and like try to appeal to like the racist crowd here. If it wasn't for those comments, his book probably is a spot or two higher, but they are there. So the kidnap murder case comes in here at number 11. At number 10, the only book in my bottom six that is not one of the final six Philo Vance novels, and that is The Scarab Murder Case. And I know and I agree that the final six books in this series are mostly terrible, but let's not skip over this book, which caused some controversy at the time of publication because readers found the murder mechanics insulting to their intelligence because it was just so ludicrous. Readers were insulted Van Dyne thought they would fall for it. If I'm being honest, like, yeah, I get it. The solution is a little ridiculous. I don't think it's like totally off the rails as far as some mystery novels go. The larger issue is just how boring this book is. I mean, large chunks of this book is dedicated to giving us the history of ancient Egypt, which is a subject I'm normally interested in, but that's not the case here. I mean, this feels like a history lecture at times. Philo Vance goes on tangent after tangent, and to the point that the murder takes kind of a back seat. And the murder itself is somewhat interesting, but it's difficult to get invested in the book with all this history going on. There's also some weird commentary about characters who are Egyptian, mostly from Sergeant Heath. Now, Heath is an interesting character. He's a good character in his role, but because we're never supposed to be taking his side of things, and he's a rival of Philo Vance's, he does get depicted as racist and prejudiced at some points, and it's odd because he is technically on the side of good, and we're not supposed to be siding with him, however. And overall, his commentary is just strange and uncomfortable. It never gets to the point of like being like outright racist, but it comes close. And the Scarab murder case is largely dull and ridiculous. It has some minor points of interest that land it here at number 10. At number 9 is a book I did consider putting in last at one point, and that is The Winter Murder Case, the final Philo Vance novel. And this is another book written clearly to attract big named Hollywood actresses. This one intended for Sonia Henney, who was also a figure skater. And this one is just odd because Van Dyne died very shortly after finishing this book, so it's largely unedited. There are parts of this book that are mostly just outlines instead of actual prose. For instance, Van Dyne would write dialogue for a character, but instead of having the actual dialogue there, the text reads as an outline of what Van Dyne would have had that character say had he got around to editing it. This book feels very unfinished, even though it does have an entire plot. The whole story is there. It's just not like fleshed out and tuned up. It's a very short novel, but overall, the plot is actually pretty good. Certainly very strong for a late career Philo Vance. It is odd though because we are not in New York and a lot of the recurring characters are just like out of the picture or make very brief cameos. I did enjoy this book somewhat, but I couldn't place it too high just because of the state it's left in, so I have it here at number 9. At number 8, and we're finally starting to move into some of the better ones, but these I just find mostly mediocre, but not atrocious. And at number 8, I have The Garden Murder Case. This one involves horse racing, and we don't have too many tangents about that, just enough to make it annoying, but not overwhelming. The setup is actually pretty good here. Our victim, or our first victim, rather, may have committed suicide after he lost a bet on a horse. We have more murders and attempted murders. I actually find this one probably breezier to read than the book above it, but the reason why I have this one below is that this book rehashes a lot of things we've already seen from Van Dyne. It reuses a lot of the same trappings and tricks and twists previous books did, and it doesn't like reinvent them in an interesting way. Mystery authors do this all the time, but they hide and they improve upon their tricks, and this book just doesn't do that. This book does make a funny reference to the infamous Ogden Nash line, Philo Vance needs a kick in the pants, really showing where this author's mind was at the time. And like I said, I do think it is more interesting and more fascinating than the book in seventh place, but I do feel like the solution was extremely disappointing, so I had to put it below that book here at number 8. At number seven is another book from the second half of the canon, and that is The Casino Murder Case. And as you might have guessed, this book largely focuses on a casino, but also an auction house. And the mystery here is pretty good. We have multiple poisonings, some committed at the same time, but in different places. And the weird thing here is that no one can figure out just like how the poison was administered or even like what it is. The solution relies on then brand new science, which I think largely holds up today, but it was a risky thing to do at the time. And like I said, I think the garden murder case is a lighter, easier read than the casino murder case, but this book is a better quality mystery, which is why I have it above that other book. However, it still does have that like lesser quality of the later Philo Vance novels, and the ending is another letdown. And this book is the first chronologically where it seems Van Dyne leapt full into just like being a parody of a mystery writer instead of like an actual mystery writer. It definitely feels like a man desperate to compete with like the queens of crime across the pond, all of whom were on the scene by this time and gaining in popularity. I think a book like The Casino Murder Case shows Van Dyne just could not keep up with them and started flailing a bit, so I have it here at number seven. At number six, and now I think we're finally on to books I'm more positive on than negative, though a few of these still are flawed. And at number six, I have The Bishop Murder Case. This is actually a very important mystery novel. It is the first mystery novel ever to have a nursery rhyme theme to it, something very commonly seen moving forward. This one follows the Who Killed Cock Robin nursery rhyme, and like many nursery rhyme mysteries, this one feels extremely forced, which is a shame because the mystery is very good. I enjoy the plot a lot here. It's just the constant shoehorning of people with weird names like Cock Robin and Johnny Sprigg. Like, what are the odds these people are all connected to each other with names like those? It's just too much. But like I said, I think the murder plot is very strong. I mean, the culprit is a little too obvious, but not in a way that hinders the read because there are plausible other suspects. I did not remember this book on my reread, and I did pick out the murderer pretty much instantly, but I still enjoyed it. My other hang up with this book is the constant talks about chess and mathematical theorems. It's very tedious. I mean, I prefer boring history lessons than boring math lessons and chess talk. I do not have any interest in chess or math, and there's a lot of it here, and none of it is relevant to the plot. I mean, you can just skip like entire chapters of this and not lose anything. And the book does drag out unnecessarily because of it. So, for those reasons, I have the Bishop murder case here at number six. Number five is a book I really wanted to put higher on the list, but I couldn't for a very specific and graphic reason, and that is The Kennel Murder Case. And this book features a lot of dogs and Chinese art, dogs being the more interesting of these two subjects, but it never goes overboard. And this is a classic Golden Age locked room mystery novel, and it's a good one. It's actually solved pretty realistically, especially for a locked room mystery. We don't have any sort of like ridiculous shenanigans in the solving of this crime. It's actually a double murder, with one of them being the locked room, and both of them seemingly impossible. The main victim is a collector of Chinese art, but the most pressing clue involves the sudden and random appearance of a dog. And I'm going to warn you that the rest of my talk about this book is going to involve animal abuse. So if you don't want to hear that, skip on to number four. The strange dog has been beaten, and I know animal abuse is a taboo subject in literature. Personally, I'm not someone who thinks like literature should avoid taboo subjects, so as long as it's done right, and it's partially done right here, the animal abuse is depicted as something very bad and unmanly. It's treated as worse than the murder, and it can be uncomfortable. It's not the reason why I have this book this low. The real reason is because of the end. And spoiler here, I'm not going to reveal the culprit, but I'm going to reveal part of the ending. This book ends with an abused dog turning on its abuser and mauling them to death. It's extremely graphic and uncomfortable, and I did not like this at all. This really should not have been in there. And now I have an older edition of this book, so I suspect this might actually be removed from newer editions. I'm not sure. And I could have done without it. And there's also some weird talk about Chinese people from Sergeant Heath, who, again, we're not supposed to agree with, but it is weird. And Philo Vance has a great deal of respect for the Chinese characters, so it works out. And barely avoiding Van Dyne's own rules against quote unquote Chinamen in detective fiction. The Kennel murder case is a very good novel held back by a few unignorable negatives that land it here at number 5. At number 4, finally, I have the highest ranked book from the second half of the series, The Dragon Murder Case. And I know this book annoys some people, but I've always found it very enjoyable. Philo Vance investigates the disappearance of a man who jumped into a swimming pool and then never came up. There are other crimes, including murder as well, and this one has a big, like, gonzo type puzzle, which admittedly isn't very convincing, but it is the kind of plot that is very enjoyable to the extent I can forgive its implausibleness. There's a subplot involving a mythological dragon that everyone seems to believe is real, but because this is a mystery novel, the reader knows that it is not real, as that is one of Van Dyne's rules of detective fiction, no supernatural elements. And I think it's handled very well. Agatha Christie used these kinds of plots on occasion where the idea isn't that the supernatural is real, it's that people believe in the supernatural and that can be used to someone's benefit. And that's what Van Dyne does here. It's very credible in the way the culprit and other characters use the supernatural belief to their benefit. The big informative topic in this one is fish, specifically aquarium fish, which is actually interesting here. I mean, they talk a lot about some of the weirder fish out there, including the possibility that the fish may have eaten the disappearing victim. And I also found Dr. Dormus pretty good in this one. He's the medical examiner, and he just gets extremely angry whenever he's called to a scene because he's always eating dinner at the time and he gets mad. And this one, he gets mad because he gets called when there's no body. And it's just a really fun moment from him. Probably his best novel appearance. And I know this novel is not held high in regard by the critics out there, but you know what? I'm a critic too, and I love this book, so it comes in here at number 4. At number 3, and these top 3 make up the first 3 books in the series, which is strange. Usually my top spots are for books published like just after the first batch from an author, but here it's the first 3, and at number 3 is the very first novel, The Benson Murder Case. And I talked about this book in my first novels video, and my opinion of it has not changed. This is a very strong first entry for Philo Vance. It lacks the sort of like frills other books have. It's very introductory, start with the basics. And I think because of that, it can be a bit slow. I don't find the characters to be that interesting in this one. A lot of like stuffy lawyer type people, but the mystery itself is beautifully constructed, minus a slight ballistics issue. Our victim was shot in his home by a person unknown, and Vance does bungle up the ballistics a bit, but that's not really the important part. Vance insists he can solve the crime via psychology, which he does to the dismay of Sergeant Heath, who is this like gruff police sergeant who doesn't go for like that modern hoo-ha. And this is a first novel, and it does a fantastic job of introducing the recurring characters. This is a good book to start with the series because it feels almost like a tutorial. It's like a basic plot to introduce you to the way Philo Vance and team operate. It does lack at times, I think, in like creativity, and it feels like it needs something more to make it stand out in a crowd. But at the same time, this is a good example of a book that has like a basic mystery plot, but still is very strong. You don't always need like the completely bonkers mystery plot here to have a good story. So I have the Benson murder case here at number 3. At number 2 is the second novel in the series, The Canary, in quotes, murder case. And in many ways, this book is just a better version of the plot from the Benson murder case. It's not the same, but there are a lot of similar things going on. The plot is very streamlined with not much deviation from the norm. Our victim is a former Ziegfeld Folly, Margaret Odell, nicknamed the Canary, who was murdered in her apartment, which is also ransacked. And like the previous novel, there are a bunch of suspects who are all on the scene and are all claimed to be innocent. They have alibis, but not like particularly strong alibis. And Vance thinks he can solve the murder via psychology, and Heath says no. And Markham is just desperate for help anywhere he can get it. This book does more things and more interesting things than the Benson murder case. There is an element of the professional criminal, and minor spoiler here, but Van Dyne's rules forbid the use of professional criminals in the resolution of a crime, so you know he's not going to use it here, but he uses the professional burglar element very interestingly. But the problem remains is that a reader will know this is a red herring and see right through it, which is unfortunate because it is well executed otherwise. I also think the murderer is pretty clearly foretold here, but this book is very good and is considered one of the best American crime stories from the 1920s, and I would agree with that. But I think the book at number one is just so much better in every way. So I have the Canary murder case here at number two. And at number one, the best Philo Vance novel to me is The Greene Murder Case. And I would say this is the only Philo Vance novel that is like truly top tier in the realm of mystery fiction. This book is not based on a real life murder like some of the previous ones were. And I think you can absolutely feel Rex Stout having more freedom to develop this murder all on his own. Our victims are members of a large dysfunctional family, the Greenes, and dysfunctional families are always fun. The catch here is that several members seem to have been shot nearby other members, and no one seems to have noticed or heard anything at all. Several people claim not even to have like heard the loud shots and like banging and people running through the house and everything. And everyone's behavior is just extremely suspicious. And Van Dyne does an excellent job with obfuscation here. Just when it appears a prime suspect rises, that person is murdered. And it happens multiple times, and you never really see it coming. The mechanics of the murder are so much more complicated in this one, but still very believable. Van Dyne strays from that almost mechanical routine of his first two books to go outside the box and give us something different. This book does have all the bells and whistles. It takes you down the wrong path and feels much less like a police procedural. I don't mean to say the previous ones were police procedurals, but they really aren't because they aren't, but this book is less reliant on police methods and focuses more on the psychological aspects. Vance always claimed he does that, but this is really the only book in the series where I feel he actually does do that. The human nature and the personalities of the character provide major clues in a way no other Philo Vance novel does. Typically, these books talk about human nature, but uses more generally and not specifically. The one-off characters are mostly stock, so it becomes a matter of what would a person in this position do. But in the Greene murder case, the characters are not stock. So we have questions posed like, what would Sibylla Greene do? And not like, what would an elder daughter do? And the Greene murder case provides an entertaining murder, good characters, and a complex plot, and it all comes together to form a fantastic mystery novel. So I have it here at number one. And that is it for this video. These books were quite the mixed bag for me, and overall a little disappointing. I still recommend the top six books on my list, especially the top three. But my opinion of these books did fall, even though my opinion of the characters did not. The next mystery author I will cover will be Rex Stout's Nero Wolf, as voted on by you. And I will post the new poll shortly after I put up this video so you can select my next mystery author slash detective series after that. Next week is Dame Nio Marsh's birthday, and I will be celebrating by reviewing her very first novel, A Man Lay Dead, which celebrates its 90th anniversary this year, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.